Hello, everybody. We are trying a new way of recording, so hopefully this will work. And welcome to the Deviant Mind. This is Dominika.
And this is Christopher.
And today we are diving deep into the case of JonBenet Ramsey, which was a little girl who was murdered in her home. And this happened in 1996. And Chris and I were talking about this before we started recording, how, we both grew up with this case, but it's only recently that we have become parents to little girls. And not saying that this was not a terrible case back then, but it definitely had a much more like visceral feeling to it. So I guess if anything, content warning, we're going to be talking about a little girl who was murdered. And some of the evidence is a little bit difficult. There are some signs that she was sexually assaulted.
Yeah.
And so if this might be a little bit too much for you, then definitely might want to skip that.
Yeah.
But otherwise, so JonBenet Ramsey, 1996. Where were you in 1996?
Murdered, by the way, under the pretense that she had been kidnapped, which makes the whole case absolutely bonkers. In 96,
and it was Christmas of 1996.
It was Christmas of 96. Did you just ask where I was?
Yeah, where you were.
Yeah,
I was just thinking, where was I?
I might have been either living in Philadelphia at the time, or I think I was in Philly, or I went back to Brooklyn. How about you? Where were you?
I think I was in Connecticut. I was still actually in college. So, but it was because it was over Christmas time. Then I would have been back in Connecticut. But I remember this case exploding in the headlines. This is, again, one of those cases that there are multiple forums, Reddit threads, a billion documentaries. I mean, the amount of so many books that have been published about this case, because unfortunately this case has not been solved.
I was just going to say, perhaps the most infamous unsolved case in our country.
Yeah. I mean, most people know of JonBenet Ramsey, and I'm sure that I've heard this on multiple true crime podcasts as well. So we'll see if we can bring anything new to it. It was, we did segue to this from our last case on Susan Walker. And also,
if I may, 96, this happens on the heels of OJ, the OJ trial.
The OJ trial again as well. And this also has some really messed up police and political interference. This man, the father, John, was very well known in the community. He was very wealthy. And there's some questions as to whether or not that they got a lot of leeway in the investigation itself. And of course, none of us know what actually happened in that home. Please don't sue us. But this is just our thoughts and opinions.
Just our thoughts.
And just our theories. And again, there's so much information on here. We will post in the show notes. I'm a little behind on the show notes, so the last 4 episodes will be coming in the next week on the show notes, but we'll post the documentaries and the books that we looked at. And the Denver Post had a very, very succinct kind of breakdown of the case. So so here we go.
And it's still ongoing. Just as of last year, John Ramsey attended CrimeCon, right? Which is where all these armchair sleuths meet. They discuss unsolved cases. So, and he was there last year speaking about it. So it's still ongoing. I mean, here we are. I mean, it's 2023, and right now we're discussing it. It's unreal.
Yes, exactly. So I think the way we're going to start is we're going to start with this family and who JonBenet Ramsey actually was as a little girl. She, of course, died very young. So I think she had only started kindergarten at this point in time.
6 years old. 6 years old.
6 years old. So, there's just what she loved as a little 6-year-old. But first, we're going to, well, maybe we should start with her first, and then we can go to the parents, and then we can go into the timeline as we know it of what happened in that 24 hours in where her body was found. And then we can start going into the investigation, which is completely wild and nuts. I have a feeling this is probably going to be a 2-episode series. So this is part 1. And so as
and Burke, we got to discuss Burke.
We got to discuss Burke too. Absolutely. Wow. Got to discuss Burke.
Yeah.
And right now, as of 2023, we're April 14th. Burke Ramsey is still alive, as is John Ramsey is alive. Patsy Ramsey died in 2000. What did she die? She died in 2006, I believe, of ovarian cancer. So she is no longer with us, but John is, and Burke is as well. And I believe, didn't Burke go on a talk show to talk about this case at some point?
He did. He spoke with, he sat down with Dr. Phil, and it was essentially, technically the first interview, at least in the land of media, that he gave. He, of course, at 9 and 11 was interviewed by authorities.
Right, so,
of
course.
Yeah, so he sits down with Dr. Phil, and I forget what year that is, but he's definitely a young adult at the time.
Okay. And then I'm sure if any of you know about JonBenet, she was also a beauty pageant queen, which her mother was very big into. And so I think that was one of the things that exploded in the media was the photos of her.
Yes.
Both the professional photos that her mom had taken, as well as video of her singing. And so, like, during pageants. And I think that made this case even more crazy because this thing exploded for years in the media.
Also, the photographer of some of those pageants stepped forward, came to the media and was like, hey, I have some stuff too. And then he basically said that it started at like $10,000 here and there. And then it jumped up to like $25,000 within a couple of weeks for his material, for all and any photos or videos he may have taken.
Oh, that he had taken of her.
And then you see what's interesting also is with these photos and the, going into the media, it was yet another reason, as we'll discuss in detail, for the public to continue to not like the family.
Right.
Because who does that? Like, oh my God, I can't believe she would put her daughter through that.
Yeah. So definitely the media crucified the family.
Yeah.
And
but by all accounts, she enjoyed it, from what I understand.
She's a
kid.
She was a kid. She loved it. And that was what I was going to go into. This was a lot of this information I got from a Denver Post article that interviewed her family friends, her various family members that knew her, people who worked for the Ramseys, her teachers at her school. So this was kind of like in her 6 years of life. Her uncle, Jeff Ramsey, said that, quote, she was just a normal, happy child, and she was a really good kid, and that the beauty pageant thing was actually a very, very small part of her life. And this is a quote from him as well. And 99% of her life was spent as a typical 6-year-old. And what we see on TV and in the pictures, that's not who JonBenet was. And she definitely liked doing kind of the showgirl type of thing. She's always smiling. She loved sparkly things, but then what 6-year-old girl doesn't? My daughter was like insane about sparkle until just recently, where she's gone all black. I don't like all black clothes. I don't know where that came from, but anyway, sparkly things. She, I guess, loved homemade fruit roll-ups. She loved her dog, which she got as a 4-year-old for Christmas, and his name was Jacques. And she was a spunky kid. She was really funny. She spent kindergarten nap time trading secret hand signals and soft giggles with a little boy on the next mat. This is again from that same Denver Post article. She gave presents to Santa. She was really sweet and thoughtful and was always making sure that her older brother Burke was getting warm attention as well, because obviously she got quite a bit of attention. She was Patricia, which I think she was known as Patsy.
Yes.
Patsy's full attention.
That's right.
And
she apparently used to, one of the things that she loved to do was run around and ask people, how was your day? So I found that really sweet. Like, you know, like a 6-year-old, 5-year-old running around being like, how are you? It was really sweet.
And, you know, she also, there was, they spoke to this woman named Irene Wills, whose daughter Lucinda was John Ramsey's first wife. So I guess his former mother-in-law, I guess. And she said that JonBenet was never spoiled, and you never really saw her as cross or upset, which I'm like, wow, that's pretty amazing for a 6-year-old, because mine's still throwing tantrums.
Yeah. Same. I mean,
and that she was just like this, like really sweet, kind little girl. And she did sorry, I keep
a bit of trivia. Benet in JonBenet is a play on John's middle name, which is, I believe, Bennett.
Yes. And his first name is John. Right. And then I believe her middle name is Patricia after her mother. So she is a connection of the two parents. Now, there's also this whole story about how the Ramseys would hire a man to be Santa Claus every Christmas. And
Bill McReynolds.
Bill McReynolds. And he used to have gold sparkles in his beard that JonBenet absolutely loved. And so she gave him for Christmas a vial of gold glitter that he was so touched by, because obviously most children don't give Santa Claus gifts. And when he had his heart surgery, he actually took that vial of gold glitter for good luck. And that he also stopped being Santa after she was found murdered, because he just couldn't handle something, you know, he wouldn't be able to play that anymore.
And he'll come up again later.
Yes, he will. And so that's pretty much, you know, just like a normal, loving child.
It's amazing. You know, we've discussed, you know, you've come with a lot of information in past episodes regarding the victims. We just did it in like 5 minutes. That's, you know, that's how young she is.
Yeah.
That's it. That's like pretty much all we know about her life.
Yeah. Which is again, it's just heart-wrenching. She was born in Central Georgia on August 8th, 1990. And her parents moved to Boulder when she was a year old. And so now we'll go into her parents. So her father, John Ramsey, took a job to head Access Graphics, which was a 380-person firm that distributed high-end computer products. And so he was originally from Lincoln, Nebraska, and he graduated from Michigan State University in 1966. He was actually 13 years older than Patsy, and Patsy was actually his second wife. He had a spouse, he had a spouse named Lucinda Pash, who he divorced in 1978, and they had 3 kids together. So when he married Patsy, she was only 23 at the time, and then they started their life together that way. But we'll go to Patsy in a second. So he was in the Navy in 1966, and he served as a civil engineer corps officer in the Philippines for about 3 years, and then went to the Atlanta Reserve for another 8 years. Now, He was very, by all accounts and purposes, very wealthy. So in 1989, he formed an advanced product group, which was one of 3 companies that merged to become Access Graphics. And he became president and chief executive officer of Access Graphics. And it was a subsidiary of Lockheed Martin. So in 1996, Access Graphics grossed over $1 billion, and Ramsey was named Entrepreneur of the Year by the Boulder Chamber of Commerce. So Boulder is a small town, and he's already a big man in town. So he knew everybody.
Not only that, but something to point out here is that he was a self-made wealthy person. He didn't come from privilege. He wasn't an inheritance. He did make his own money, which is
he did make his own money, but with money comes power, and I think
100%.
that's going to go into kind of the story of why this got so extremely messy. So her mom, her name was Patricia Ann Ramsey, and everybody called her Patsy. She was born in December 1956, and she was an American beauty pageant winner. And she won Miss West Virginia pageant at age 20 in 1977. And she did go to university. She went to the West Virginia University, where she belonged to the Alpha Xi Delta sorority, and she graduated with a BA in journalism in 1978. So her sister, Pamela, also won Miss West Virginia at age 24 in 1980, right after her. And she, we mentioned before, she married John Ramsey when she was 23 years old on November 5th, 1980. And he already had 3 children from his first marriage to Lucinda. And Burke Ramsey was born on January 27th, 1987. And then JonBenet was born on August 6th, 1990. And they moved to Boulder, Colorado in 1991. So Patsy started JonBenet in children's beauty contests pretty quickly. And by the time that JonBenet passed, she had already won several beauty contest titles. So she wasn't only a beauty queen, but she actually won them. So
her pals, Patsy's pals, said that she was really into pomp and circumstance and pageants and everything that went along with it. She really wanted to be someone. When she graduated, she was really looking to become someone. She was also very flamboyant, outspoken, which I knew later that she is very outspoken and can be abrasive. But she, a lot of folks close to Patsy felt that she was living vicariously, perhaps through JonBenet. Like, I can't do these pageants anymore, but I'm going to pass this torch on to my daughter.
Right, exactly. And then there is Burke. What should we say about Burke? He's still alive.
He's still alive. He was the firstborn to John and Patsy, and he was the light of their life, got tons of attention. But once they have JonBenet, over time he starts losing that attention, and then is actually diagnosed with perhaps being on the spectrum, and has issues with what they call scatology. He's a scatologist. He smears his poop feces on things, which they say is either is one of the things that why the whole I guess something that relates to being on the spectrum. But some folks either do it out of aggression or out of insecurity and feeling the loss of attention or things like this. And they feel, meaning those who, the psychiatrists or psychologists who, dove into whatever mental issues he felt that his was out of aggression, that
Right.
he would do that when he was really angry and really upset.
I see.
But other than that, really smart, really nice kid, but definitely changed. And that's something that I feel his parents didn't really address until later, I feel, once he goes back to being the only child.
Yeah, right, exactly. Which, I mean, this is not uncommon um when people have a second child. Like, I've heard um kids who had been fully potty trained start wetting the bed because they don't know how to fully handle the lack of attention, because you go from being like a single kid to all of a sudden have to share attention. And at least for the first couple years, it's a lot of attention, right? As it goes from like the baby goes from a newborn baby into a toddler. Like, I mean, the parents, attention is always on them. I believe that actually Patsy was like a full-on stay-at-home mom. I don't believe these kids were raised by nannies, even though she would have been able to, but she really,
to her credit,
really wanted to, be a mom and mom these children. And that's what she did.
Yeah.
And
they say he developed a lot of his personality and smiling from his mom and JonBenet. Like, they're always pretty much smiling. And I think that's the kind of like the mom being like, hey, let's be happy and smile. So whatever, anything may have been going through his mind or whatever issues Burke was dealing with, he always had a smile on his face, which I think is really interesting. Being influenced by that family.
Right. So, so I think now what we're going to do is go into the timeline of the night that this happened, and then we can kind of go from there. So, okay, so this is December. This is December 25th.
I laugh just because it's all crazy.
It's just so crazy. I don't even know what to say. So, all right. So December 25th, 1996, the whole family, the John and Patsy and JonBenet and Burke, go at 5:30 p.m. to their friends, the Whites. They were having a family party and they were invited to that. And they ended up having dinner there. Now at 8:30 p.m., they leave the White family's party. And there's some places that they said that they stopped at another friend's house. That might have been the Steins, but I couldn't entirely find confirmation for that. At 9:15 p.m., they come home and JonBenet is already asleep. And so John supposedly carries the sleeping JonBenet to bed. And that's at 9:20. Now,
wow, I just realized the irony of that.
Right. So, this is a little aside, but by 10:30 p.m., Dr. Werner Spitz, he was one of the coroners, claimed that JonBenet's dinner should have been fully digested by that time, by 10:30 p.m. So now we move to December 26, 1996. So this is, it goes past midnight. The coroner at around 1, and again, this is like, we don't really know what happened during this time, but around 1:30 a.m., JonBenet eats some pineapple because it was found undigested in her stomach during autopsy. And so that's an estimate. Now, Patsy, she wakes up at around 5:30-ish. This was the story that she said, 5:30 a.m. And when she comes downstairs, she finds a 2.5-page note on the back staircase of the house. And the note says that JonBenet has been kidnapped and demands a very specific number, $118,000 in cash. So The 911 call from Patsy Ramsey comes at 5:52 a.m. This is where it gets weird because immediately after that, at 5:54, she calls family friends, the Fernies and the Whites, and asks them to come over. So, which is weird because this is a crime scene now. Two sets.
Two sets of different friends. Two different sets.
Four people.
And then
that are now going to be coming into this house at 5:54, which is a crime scene.
And the next minute, the cops show up. Like at 5:55.
At 5, well, I have 5:59, which is the first officer, French. He arrives on the scene.
That is quick since she makes the call at that time.
Right. And now they live in a very fancy, exclusive neighborhood called Chautauqua. So I'm assuming, again, rich people, that they come in like what, 4 minutes.
I mean, I just think of the victims in Jeffrey Dahmer's building who kept calling the cops and being like, wow, there's something weird. And they would just sometimes not even show up.
Never show up. Exactly. So, so supposedly like 1 or 2 minutes later, around 6 a.m., the family friends arrive. And they then are joined by crime scene investigators and victims advocates. Now, in that time, there's reports that one of the moms, I'm not sure which is the Fernies or the Whites, starts cleaning the kitchen.
Yes. With Patsy.
I
heard it was friends. It was like maybe a few people, perhaps.
Maybe a few people. So again, this is like people cleaning up a crime scene. The police and the crime scene investigators don't stop them. Just something of note. Like, I don't quite understand that. So at around 8:10 a.m., the detective Arndt arrives at the Ramsey house. And at 8:15 a.m., Ron Walker is contacted by the Boulder PD. At 10:30 a.m., Detective Arndt notices that John Ramsey has disappeared. At 11 a.m., Ron Walker arrives at Boulder Police HQ. And at 11:45 a.m., Ron Walker meets with Sergeant Mason at Boulder Police HQ. At noon, so it's 12 p.m., Detective Arndt notifies Sergeant Mason that John Ramsey is still missing. They can't find him. At 1 p.m., Detective Arndt speaks to Ramsey and White, and he comes back again, obviously, so he's found again. At 1:05 p.m., John Ramsey finds JonBenet's body while with Fleet White, and he carries her upstairs. He takes off the duct tape that is off her mouth. Now, here's the other thing. In this time, there have been searches that have happened with both the crime scene investigators as well as Fleet White. And they all supposedly looked at...
And some friends.
They
became cops.
That they had seen... that they had gone down to that wine cellar and he was there. She wasn't there.
There was nothing there.
So she was found under a blanket, kind of in this very dark room. So you'd walk in and Fleet White has had already, there were no longer friends. He's called a former friend. He swore that there was no body there when he went down the first time, even though it was really dark. Now, when he went back again, because I think the detectives asked John to look for the daughter's body again, as they were looking through the note, and John immediately went downstairs straight to the room.
Yeah, and it was actually I think Linda Arndt was actually at this point by herself. That's the other crazy thing. The cops around 12ish or even a little before clear out the scene. Like eventually someone comes to the realization, hey, everyone get out of here. So everyone leaves. And then gradually all the cops start going back to their precincts or whatever. They're talking with the FBI. She's totally left alone. Right. And she has no background in homicide.
Right.
Which is really wild. So she does catch, eventually she sees, after so long with not seeing him, she sees John going through mail, just like going through mail, yutzing around the kitchen. And that's when she suggests around 1 o'clock, like, hey, maybe you should take another look around, like do something,
Yeah. Yeah.
And then that's White and John go down, and John apparently is able to recognize that it's JonBenet before the light is turned on. The light is on behind them, and it does cast a bit of light into that basement back room, but not enough, said White, to show what was going on. I mean, by all accounts, it probably just looked like some sort of blanket in the corner. And before the light is on, he's able to recognize, oh, that's got to be JonBenet.
But it wasn't. I didn't think it was in the corner. I thought she was just inside the door, but kind of out of the light that was spilled. Yeah,
like middle back. I mean, obviously enough so where, like for John, if we follow his story, there's enough little light for him to tell, like maybe he sees a foot under the blanket, maybe there's something there.
Right.
But either way, he basically as you said, he beelines it for the basement.
Right. And again, as a parent, I can't even imagine this, but he took there was duct tape over her mouth, and he took that off. So again, there's already evidence being destroyed because he's moved her. She's very apparently dead. So he moves her, brings her upstairs. Her body actually is moved again.
Yes.
By
Linda Arndt. She suggests putting JonBenet near the Christmas tree. And he also removes the rope, which is, interestingly enough, not around her wrist, but the sweater, her wrist, or whatever she was wearing, over the wrist part of her shirt or whatever it was, long sleeve, and not on her skin. So there's this rope that he also removes.
Right.
And then Linda Arndt finds a blanket and just puts it over her body.
Which again is completely destroying the evidence. Now, I mentioned Ron Walker in that timeline, so I wanted to kind of do a quick who is that guy? That guy was FBI Special Agent Ron Walker, and he was on it. He was a profiler, and he was an experienced profiler at the FBI's Denver office.
Yeah.
And so he was already at the precinct, at the Boulder Police Headquarters, when Detective Sergeant Larry Mason got a page from the Ramsey house saying, we've got a body. And he was in that investigation immediately. And
everyone says that was the weirdest, by the way, I have to point this out, the weirdest ransom note ever.
Oh, yeah. Well, I think we should absolutely.
I mean, we'll get into that.
Into the ransom note, because that was insane. Wow. But so Ron Walker, FBI profiler, he arrived at the crime scene at 1:20 p.m. And this is crazy. At 1:40 p.m., John Ramsey calls a pilot and asks him to prepare the plane because he wants to take his family back to Georgia.
And what's interesting was after Christmas, the family plan was to go to Michigan.
Mm-hmm. And
he's on the phone.
He's on the phone wanting to get his family out. Now, so on another article, it says that because this Ron Walker was an experienced FBI profiler, and he knew that if they did find JonBenet's body in the home, that meant she probably was never kidnapped. And typically, in a case of homicides, when there's a dead child in a parent's home, FBI standard procedure is to investigate the parents and the immediate family first.
Yeah.
And so that's where it started, and that's where things got really, really weird.
Yeah.
So,
so much contamination. I mean,
so much contamination of the scene.
Oh my God.
When the FBI initially offered to help the Boulder Police Department, they were rebuffed.
That's right.
And said that we don't need you. And so that was a huge mistake. So like searches weren't done. They didn't even actually really talk to the family.
Yeah.
The governor got involved because again, this guy is head of $1 billion a year corporation, right? Yeah. So it was a lot, right? So and then everything obviously exploded. Now, so if you can imagine, the police actually let the Ramseys go to Georgia, and they were not interviewed by the police until April 30th, 1997, which was 4 months later. I'm just like putting that out there as a timeline.
Not before,
oh my God.
Not before first appearing on television on CNN. Then they were interviewed. Right.
That's right.
So they spoke with media before any authorities.
Right. So the speaking of media, so the police put out a press release on December 30th, 1996, saying there's no cause for concern for any neighbors. There's no like maniac on the loose. There was a window found in the basement that was open, but when they asked John about it, he said that he had broken the window I guess it was like maybe a week, so several weeks ago, because he had to get inside the house.
Yeah, never got it.
And they had found a spider web right outside of it that had not been disturbed.
Yes.
So nobody, the police really thought that he
and the blue luggage underneath the window.
Right. So they didn't think that that anybody actually got through it. Now, so I think maybe now we should maybe go to how like the evidence on JonBenet. Should we do that? What actually happened to her?
I'd love to go
into
back
the ransom note.
I'd love to run back into some of what you've already laid out and throw in some weird little things.
All right.
So off the bat, pineapple, right? The pineapple in her system. It was believed that there is an intruder and this was a failed kidnapping. Perhaps the perpetrator or the suspect fed it to her. There were fingerprints found of both Patsy's and Burke's on the bowl, as well as on a glass of tea that was nearby this bowl. The other thing is the phone call to 911. She sounds panicky. I mean, it's genuine. But then towards the end of the call, the 911 operator hears that Patsy may have failed to actually hang up the phone, and she hears a bit of stuff, which the cops and feds would later find a way to isolate and greatly increase the volume so they can make out what's going on. But the 911 operator was under a gag order for years, as are a lot of the people involved in this case, and were not allowed to speak. She was not allowed to speak about what she heard. But then eventually she was like, screw this. Like, it's just been so long and this could probably help. But she hears Patsy, then John, then another faint voice. And when, if I may, when they raise the volume and you're able to listen to it, you hear John say, we're not talking to you. And then we hear Patsy say, what did you do? Help me, Jesus. Then you hear Burke say, what did you find? And then the phone hangs up. And then she calls the friends. So that's really, who knows if that's exactly what's being said? Who knows if it's just like rumbling and sounds being made? But I'm going to, it's pretty odd that the 911 operator has a gag order and this is what she hears.
And this is what she hears. Now, and also what the Ramseys say is that Burke, their son, slept through this whole thing. And
he says it too in his interview.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes. Yes, he does say that. And in fact, he says that he had to actually wake him up to take him to the White's house after the police were called. And so that's the story that they said is he slept through it all. Nothing happened. He was just totally asleep. Now, again, obviously, who else was eating pineapple with her, right?
Right.
And they found they found the fingerprints on there. So, they also found, because in the end, they had taken a lot of evidence out of the house.
Mm-hmm.
So they had logged 1,058 pieces of evidence, tested 500 pieces, interviewed 590 people, and logged all their findings in a 30,000 page case file. And what they also found in the house was, well, first, let's go back to the ransom note. So handwriting experts from the CBI eliminated John Ramsey as the note author, but they couldn't do the same for Patsy. That they collected at least 5 handwriting samples from Patsy, along with some kind of former things that she had written before JonBenet's death. And there was some question that maybe she was, maybe she wasn't. They couldn't say one way.
It was inconclusive.
It was inconclusive.
It's
However,
it could be or it may not be. That's what's nuts.
Yeah, and the Chet Ubowski of the CBI said that one of the samples that she gave was, quote, "This handwriting showed indications that the writer was Patsy Ramsey," close quote. And then he also told investigators that the samples she gave don't suggest her full range of handwriting. So even though she gave 5 handwriting samples, they she had others. So there was always a question of whether or not she was the one that wrote it. Now, also, the note had been written on a pad of paper that was found in their house, and it was written with a Sharpie pen that was also found in the home, which found very interesting.
And it was her pad, and it was her pen.
Yes, and now both exactly, and they did. The investigators took writing samples from a lot of people, including John, Patsy, and Burke, and then John Ramsey's children from his first marriage, his former friend Fleet White, because he was after that. Fleet White never they stopped being friends because
John threw him under the bus.
Well, yes, we're going to get to that. And Bill McReynolds, who was the Santa Claus, to make sure he wasn't like a creepy person. And their neighbor Joe Barnhill. So they really try to do their due diligence in this time. So the other thing that they found was a flashlight.
Oh wait, I got to keep going on the ransom note a second.
Okay, go for the ransom note.
Investigators felt that it was dumbed down. Okay, so it's 2.5 pages, which is unusual. And the writing style is dumbed down. Like some words are misspelled. Some sentences are just poorly constructed. And it looks as though someone is like shaking their hand while writing it just to kind of throw off perhaps someone who would investigate the handwriting. But it's like a bit shaky at times, especially at the top. And it's one of the literally perhaps the second thing that Patsy mentions on the 911 call. There's a note. And in that note, by the way, it says, "Do not contact authorities. She's dead. If you contact FBI, she'll be beheaded." Like there's a whole list of all the terrible things that will happen to JonBenet if they don't get this $1,800,000, which was the amount of John Ramsey's holiday bonus, like the exact same amount.
Right.
And she calls, and on her 911 call and on the letter, it says Victory SBTC. And off the top of the bat, it says, "Mr. Ramsey, now listen." So, which is just kind of like a weird way to start a letter. A lot of the content, not long before this whole event happens, Ransom, this movie with Mel Gibson comes out, right? So some of the lines or ideas are in this letter, such as SBTC, we're a foreign faction. It says they're a foreign faction. You have to bring thousands of dollars in tens, the rest in 20s. But there are some lines, especially the one like, if you even talk to a dog, she's dead. And it comes from Dirty Harry. There are literal lines lifted from Dirty Harry movie and Speed. Like verbatim, there's a Hopkins line where, not Hopkins, I'm blanking. But anyways, there's a line that's lifted exactly from Speed in there. And there were movie posters around the house. Like someone in that house was really into movies. They said it might have been John. Perhaps like there was whoever. It's just all very weird. But also the location of where the note was found. It's found in the back stairs. It's not at the front door. It's not in the front main stairs. It's not outside anyone's room. It's laid out sheet by sheet at the back stairs. So how did this person know that this is where Patsy would come down and find the note? It's pretty unusual.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
The note just drives me crazy. I had to throw all that in.
Yeah, no, the note was just nuts. The other thing that was found in the kitchen was a flashlight. And sources say that the investigators believe that could have caused the wound on JonBenet's skull fracture. And it was very handedly wiped clean of any prints. So that was, the police thought there were two possible murder weapons because the coroner couldn't quite figure out how exactly she died during the autopsy. So this is, I guess, a trigger warning for the autopsy findings.
Just fast forward.
She was fast forward. JonBenet, when she was found, she was wearing a long-sleeved white knit shirt with a silver star embroidered on the front and the gold necklace with a cross on it. And her blonde hair was in two ponytails. And she had a yellow metal band on her right middle finger and a yellow ID bracelet that bore the name JonBenet on one side and the 122596 on the other. On the palm of her left hand, someone had drawn a red ink heart. There was also green Christmas garland, like the garland decorating the spiral staircase in the house was tangled in her hair. She was wearing long underwear, and beneath the long underwear, she was wearing a pair of white underpants with some rosebuds and the words Wednesday on the waistband. Unfortunately, there were urine stains and several red stains on that underwear. And under a search warrant affidavit, Dr. Myers told the aunt that the stains looked like blood. So they found that there was evidence of vaginal injury, but that they did not find any semen on the body itself. But the coroner also reported that the pubic area had appeared to be wiped with a cloth. And he also noted that there was a white cord that was tied around her right wrist, and a similar cord was tied around her neck. And 17 inches of this cord hung from the knot, and the end was tied, and this is a quote, in multiple loops around a length of a round tan brown wooden stick, end quote. And that was from the coroner's report. And that specific stick was stained with paint spots and varnish. And they believe that stick actually came from painting supplies that were outside of the room that she was found, and that they were Patsy's. Mm-hmm. So the coroner found deep ligature furrows encircling the neck, and there was hemorrhaging and abrasions around the marks. She also had a skull fracture that was 8.5 inches long, which is very long. And he was not able to determine whether JonBenet, and this is Dr. Meyer, whether she died of the skull fracture or if she died of the strangulation. And he also could not pinpoint the time of death.
As well as abrasions or kind of vampire bites, for lack of whatever. It looked like vampire bites. She had like 2 wounds in 2 different areas on her back and on her side.
Which some people I saw, because I went deep down into the Reddit threads, because as I said, this is still an open case. There's a lot of internet sleuths trying to solve it. And there's a whole thing about whether or not she was dragged down there, which kind of goes along with the theory that if she was dragged, then it was Burke who did it. And that she had been placed in the carpet right outside of the door of the room, the wine cellar that she was found in, because there's photos that has come into the public sphere that found a lot of urine on the outside. And because there was a whole talk about Patsy essentially killing her in a rage because she wet the bed. Which she did. But so they're thinking that urine was where her body was laying as she was garroted, and then she was dragged, and that those wounds on her back was from her being dragged to the area where she was actually found. Again, this is like internet sleuths going through this, like, I mean, it's insane how much stuff is in there. There's a podcast. I think there could be a podcast series on this, and there probably is.
There is the victim's shoes. Later we'll get into him, but there's the detective Smith, Lou Smith, and he actually believes those markings are from a stun gun. But we'll get into a stun gun. Okay. Yeah, we'll get into that later.
So they believed that perhaps the skull fracture that was the 8.5 inches long could have been created by that flashlight. And so the piece of wood was actually a broken paintbrush, and that they kind of linked it to Patsy Ramsey's art supplies. There was also foreign DNA taken from JonBenet's underpants and fingernails. And the DNA was left in a stain found in her underwear, but it didn't match any DNA samples provided by dozens of family and friends. They collected, I mean, they just kept collecting samples from people who could have come into contact with her to see if they could find what that DNA was from. And I don't believe they've ever uncovered it. There was also an imprint found near JonBenet's body, and the detectives believe that was made by a high-tech hiking shoe. And then supposedly there was no one in her family, no one in their family, friends, and acquaintances who owned a shoe that matched that print. And there was also a palm print found on the wine cellar door. And none of those prints were taken from family and friends that matched the one left on that door. So there was also the duct tape that was found on her mouth by John Ramsey that he took off. And that tape was analyzed by the FBI, and the detectives were able to purchase an identical tape from a McGuckin Hardware in Boulder. And an Atlanta area hardware store clerk told investigators that she helped Patsy Ramsey find that duct tape in the store sometime in December, but in Atlanta, because they obviously must have been in Atlanta at that time. But when they looked for the store's receipts, they could never actually find, like, they couldn't corroborate her saying that. And investigators take computers, computer disks, CDs, like anywhere that they could see if there was any adult or child pornography, but they were never able to find anything like that. So there was nothing ever linked. So there was also that white blanket that was over JonBenet's body when she was found. And what's interesting is they rope from the backyard, and strangely enough, there was a pink Barbie nightgown that was reportedly found next to JonBenet's body as well.
Oh, interesting.
But they the crazy thing is that the parents did not give police clothing that they were wearing that night until a year later.
Yeah.
Right.
Patsy had claimed during her interrogation that she just simply wore, I think, the same clothes as the night before. or something should just put them on. So yeah.
Yeah. So it was,
wait a
that
second.
sounds awful. All right, we're back as
No.
far as the other, if you want to start, I think I'll put this in the show notes that you can come back to us. After
Yes.
that, we talked about the autopsy finding of JonBenet's body in the last, I don't know, I guess maybe it was the last 10 minutes. So JonBenet was buried in Marietta, Georgia, on December 31st, which was a Tuesday. And the next day was when John and Patsy went to CNN to give their first interview. They had an extensive interview, and Patsy Ramsey claimed that, quote, there was a killer on the loose, and that John Ramsey completely obliterates this idea that him or any of his family members could have committed that crime.
Mm.
And so, and then that night, go ahead.
I was just going to say, and then comes that famous line of hers where if you live in Boulder and you're a mother, hold your little ones tight because there's someone out in the neighborhood or something like this. There's a killer out there.
Right, exactly. And so, so things go completely nuts at this point in the media.
And they both lawyer up, incidentally, and they each have their own attorney.
Which is fascinating that they actually knew to do that, right?
And they hired a publicist.
Right.
So they do all this before even talking to the cops. And then initially when they're asked, hey, we got to talk to you, they were like, all right, on the condition we're together. We have to be in the same room together. And then and then also there was pressure on the cops and whomever wants to interview them. Can you please lay off them? Like they just lost their daughter. So there was a lot of that coming from their friends in the community, which also delayed and prolonged that whole process to be able to sit down with them.
Now, supposedly word on the street, and I think since this case has happened, there's been a lot of police officers that have left the police force. And I've not going to name any names, but there were definitely some former police that said that the moment this case hit, they were told by higher ups to leave John Ramsey and his family alone.
Mm-hmm.
Which was crazy because, as we talked about, the FBI profiler was like the first, that's standard FBI protocol, is we have to look at the family, especially in this scenario that happened. And they were specifically called off of it, like to the point that they felt like their hands were tied.
One person from the FBI says that it was as though when they showed up, the cops had their B team, that they had the people on the bench get there first. And then, once, they kind of like, oh, I don't know. Burke claims that one officer handed him a card and it said auto theft, like he was an auto theft related cop. And then another one gave him another card that had nothing to do with homicide or it's just kind of weird that this whole team. And then they were initially asked, hey, I hope they're driving there in unmarked cars. Like, let's not make a thing of this. And then they said, no, it's too late. Like they're there and they have cop cars. So there was already like this disdain for the police. Also because, Patsy and John just wanted their friends there. I think they were in such shock that they just didn't want to have to deal with a bunch of questions. And incidentally, after JonBenet's funeral, they go back to Georgia. They don't even go back to Colorado. They can't deal, apparently.
Right. Exactly. Which is so when after her funeral, that's why the detectives from Boulder have to fly to Atlanta to actually interview these people. Right. Mm-hmm. So let's see. Well, they did interview them. Where did
I got to jump back to the note. I found it. There was evidence of a practice note, like a dry run through found in the garbage.
Right. Which is like, okay, who in this house has done this? And I'm thinking maybe we should stop here And then we can go into how the investigation progressed, and then all of the information that has come out in recent years. There's been books written by former detectives that left the police force because of this case. There was also there was a block on getting long distance phone calls and itemized credit card records from the Ramseys.
Yes.
But that came out when there was like this whole it was like a Touchtone Information Acquisition Incorporated. They sold private information on people to the supermarket tabloids. And that's how the Boulder detectives were finally able to find out to get access to those long distance and itemized credit card records. So there is a lot, and I'm thinking that that's a whole episode on itself.
Yes.
So what do you think, Chris? Let's split those in two.
Yes, we're definitely going to have to split these in two, because then there's a whole media aspect and public aspect, and how and why we're still talking about this now that we have to dive into. And then there are just so many theories that kind of clouds the vision. You know, someone said the whole thing has become more about the family and everything this and all these theories that we kind of forget, like, hey, a 6-year-old girl was murdered. Like, that's what really this is all about. And we have to find out who did it. That we're just so quick to judge and think all these crazy things. And it just gets blurred after a while, you know?
Right, exactly. And then again, like, and also the bigger question is like, what was going on with her? Like, was she getting sexually abused? Because from all intents and purposes, it looks like she was. And that was also a really big question mark that has gone over this case. And there were actually sex offenders and a child molester that were arrested in the 2000s, but then they were found to not match that DNA. So there's so much swirling about this. So I think it's time to take a deep breath. Oof, that was rough. And join us next week for the media and how this investigation progressed, all the major players that had their hands in kind of the proverbial cookie jar as far as stopping certain threads from going before they even went. There was issues with the DA's office. I mean, this was a pretty, it looked like there was corruption all over this case, even though it's not really ever come out publicly. So,
incidentally, going back really quickly, to the flashlight and the skull. So Fitz or Fritz, Werner Fitz, that forensic scientist, he's amazing, by the way. It's either Fritz or Fitz.
I'm like looking at my notes and I can't find him now.
I know. I'm trying to. It's just so.
It's so much
with material. But you had actually mentioned him earlier. He felt that the strike to the head came first, and then she was garroted. That perhaps, there was the skin wasn't broken from the blow to the head, and that perhaps she was rendered unconscious, and then upon seeing that, whomever did this just went the full distance and
killed her. Yeah.
Right.
I mean, yeah, which would make sense, I guess, in the timeline, right? Because why hit somebody over the head and then, or why garrote them first and then hit them over the head? Like it doesn't quite make sense, which again kind of goes into the theory. And again, don't sue us, is that, Burke might have lost his temper and being an 8-9-year-old kid hit her hard. By accident, right? And I mean,
if I may, I got to throw this out here because you brought this up. A year prior to her being killed, Burke had struck her with a golf club.
Yeah, that's right. And that was, He
definitely had a temper. He definitely had a temper.
So anyway, there we go. Join us next week for the conclusion. Hopefully it's not going to be a 2-hour-long episode of this case, which is still unsolved. So there's never been any definitive evidence of who did it. Please don't sue us. And And take care of yourself. And I'm going to be giving my daughter a squeeze because this was a rough one for me.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks, everybody. This episode was sponsored by The Creek Killer, Book 1 in the Harriet Harper thriller series written by me, Dominika Best. What would you do if you read the police found your body in a creek? Find out in The Creek Killer, available on Amazon. Thank you for joining me and listening to this episode. If you like my show, please give me a rating and review. It helps other listeners find this podcast. Follow Dominika Best Presents The Deviant Mind wherever you listen to your podcasts. Visit thebeststorytellingnetwork.com, where you'll find show notes, my books, links to social media, and much more. Join my Patreon for special subscriber perks, like 2 extra exclusive episodes a month and a Q&A with me at patreon.com/The Deviant Mind Podcast. Until next time.